Everyone, it feels like, gosh, like 2.5 years with this COVID thing. Like, feels like life is kind of frozen to a certain extent, and then now we're all emerging. Yet I feel older, 2.5 years old, maybe look old, way older than that. But it's nice to see everyone in person. We wanted to talk a little bit about Floodplains by Design and some of the behind the scenes work that's been happening with our backbone and the kind of more of the scaffolding for FBD. And I'm looking around and I'm like, you probably all aren't super familiar with FBD, so I'm just going to give you like a quick little history and time to kind of level setting, and then we'll talk a little bit about the transition. So FBD it's an acronym that we use for Floodplains by Design. It's a program that started about 10 years ago. It's a public-private partnership that basically started as a public-private partnership with the Puget Sound Partnership, Department of Ecology, and the private piece was with the Nature Conservancy, who I work for. And the idea was really to figure out, how do we bring together diverse interests, fish, farm, and flood, and other community values together to really find integrated solutions that are supported by the community and tailored from the community. And when you can find agreement on those actions, then we have a grant program that said, hey, we can actually fund those things from the state legislature. So there's kind of two components of FBD. One is this grant program that we heard about today and funding for Snohomish and Stille, which is great news. And the other part is we know this work about trying to come together around diverse interests between fish, farm, and flood is not easy. And so really thinking about how we build a community of practice, a Floodplains by Design network to share what are we learning along the way, how do we support each other, what are the challenges, and how do we kind of build our collective capacity to do this work across the region and across the state. So there's two kind of elements to that. So TNC has been primarily kind of holding the scaffolding, what we call the backbone of this network, of the Floodplains by Design network. And in 2018, our organization said, this is a great program, but we can't really make a long-term commitment to stay as the backbone. So we're going to need to figure out how we can transition from that backbone role to another entity. And at that time we were like, how are we going to do that? There's so much momentum in this program, we don't want to lose that momentum. And we also want to make sure that kind of conservation impact is still moving forward. So it's taken us 4 years, 2018 to now. And what we heard we did a whole variety of meetings and everything, kind of reorganizing. And what we heard from our partners was like, this public-private partnership is really critical to the success of FBD. We need to keep that private entity. So we did a search, and Bonneville Environmental Foundation was just an excellent fit to really step into that role. And over the last 9 months to a year, Cass Guillauze, she has been building a team of staff to really support the Floodplains by Design program. And one of those staff is Allan Warren, which is so wonderful to have him. And we have Hannah as well from the team, and Ryan Anderson, and then obviously Cass, and then Carol McElroy is a contractor that supports BEF, and then I think eventually Bobby Whitener with the Whitener group.
We have him under contract.
Okay, yeah. We'll also support BEF for FBD. So that's kind of like where we sit with all of this, and so when we say backbone, it's really the scaffolding that really supports the grant program, that supports the kind of the policy, the regional, local connections to make sure that we're connected in a way that really advances the barriers and the difficulties of doing integrated floodplain management, and also the kind of the skill building and the learning across the network, so that we're really building the capacity to do this work over time. So with that, I will pass it to Allan to talk a little bit about BEF's vision for moving forward and their new backbone role.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for having me up today. It's good to be outside. It's good to, like Heather was saying, be in person again. Some of you know me. I came previously from the Pierce Conservation District, where I was the ag lead for the Puyallups Floodplains by Design project. So I'm really familiar, been in this space for 6-7 years. So it's good to learn, like that was one watershed focus. It's really exciting for me to start learning and meeting folks across the state and all these other watersheds. One element that I'll add on to what Heather was just saying is Brandon Parsons from American River is another key partner. So in addition to TNC kind of transitioning away in some degrees, but not wholly, the Puget Sound Partnership over the last few years has really transitioned away also, and American Rivers is that kind of third partner now, along with BEF and Department of Ecology. So as Heather said, it's, you know, there's this vision of integrated floodplain management, which is, you know, trying to address the conflicts, the historic conflicts of different stakeholder groups within floodplains and find a path forward. And then there's the grant program, which is meant to incentivize, you know, moving towards that vision. And it's a statewide program. And so we as BEF are here to support all of you and all of your counterparts statewide in the local issues that come with trying to implement funding, permitting, all the different challenges, even the interpersonal and stakeholder stress that comes about, but also ecology and helping manage the grant program. So, you know, the structure that we currently have is Brandon Parsons, who I mentioned. He leads our funding and policy action group, which is really looking on the funding side more at the federal level. And I'll get into kind of the nuances here, but looking at especially all the BIL funds coming down the pike, like how can we help activate some of those funds to leverage the state investment. So the state, since in roughly 10 years, has invested like $216 million in Floodplains by Design, and it would be great to bring on some federal partners to match that. And I caveat that with knowing like federal money comes with administrative burden, so we're not just rushing headlong into trying to bring in a bunch of federal money, because as those of you that put together the applications for FBD know, it's already pretty challenging. And then looking at policies, and one example I think that TNC led the way on in previous examples of policy is, some of you might be familiar with the HRPP, the Habitat, I'm going to blank on it, Restoration Pilot Program, which is at a state level trying to make efficiencies in permitting. It's now DFW, but TNC helped lead the way on getting that legislation passed that created the pilot program. So going forward, looking at things like that, or Linda and I had a conversation around some state policy issues around transfer development right programs. So as you all figure out your legislative priorities and you're carrying that forward to your county executives and your county councils, it's good to keep us in the loop on those as well, because there might be areas where we can help support that. And so Brandon leads kind of a quarterly meeting with disappearing task group meetings kind of in between, depending on what we're working on. And then I'm stepping into kind of a couple different roles. On the one hand, Heather's for the longest time led the Culture and Capacity Action Group, which is, in my mind, is the learning program. It's the way for, you know, folks like yourselves to share knowledge across watersheds, and you know, the challenges that you run into here and the solutions that you all figure out for how to deal with those challenges are not specific to Snohomish. They're a lot of times very universal challenges that other folks run into. And so creating that network of knowledge sharing is really, to me, the heart of what the Culture and Capacity Action Group is about. And so we're doing right now, we've done, I think since March, we've done a monthly Lunch and Learn series where similarly, like, we invite folks from the network who have good experiences or went through significant challenges, and invite them to do pretty informal presentations on Zoom at lunch and just talk through with your peers across the network, like, here's how we dealt with that, and then that leads to, you know, sharing design templates, or sharing, like, how did you go about hiring a contract management firm, things like that that are just meant to help make the work easier. And so I'm helping lead that. And then the other role, and I have yet to meet her because she's been on maternity leave, and I think she still is, but Brittany, and I'm going to blank on her last name. Gallagher. She's helped coordinate the legislative outreach piece, and that's where, to kind of touch on the conversation earlier, I'm also helping step into that role. So working really closely with Justin Allegro at TNC, who is and will remain the lobbyist for FBD. I'm helping coordinate, like, okay, the fact sheets. So Linda, you may not be aware of this because I've been communicating with Jessica Hamill at Snohomish because she's the lead on the FBD application, but I put together a fact sheet for each and every of the 19 statewide FBD projects. It's really visually driven, and it's meant to be alongside of a program-wide infographic that we just updated, like those kind of initial outreach tools to say, hey, here's our project, please come out to join us for a site tour. And then those leave behinds where you know, you're out there on site handing those off to the legislative assistants, handing those off to the legislators themselves, with that high level messaging of the impact of this work and the leveraged investment. You know, all of you local partners do an amazing job. There's a 20% match requirement, but you all go above and beyond in terms of the leveraged funding that you bring to bear, and that's the story that these fact sheets are kind of telling. And one note within the match piece, along with our funding and policy work, is like, we're on the verge of getting Ecology to drop the match requirement. So unlike like Surfboard, the match requirements are written into the RCW, they're written into law. FBD isn't, like, they just modeled it off of existing programs. It's not actually written into the law, so it's really a administrative decision, and we've, knock on wood, we're feeling fairly good that they're gonna make the decision to drop it. So that's another example of things that we're working on to just make life easier for local partners. So back to the legislative outreach, I'm here to support all of you. And, like, you know, I was on the scoring committee, I was on the ops team, I read every single proposal. And one thing I'll say is, you know, as much as we're celebrating Snohomish and Stille being within that 50 million mark, there's not a project on there that I wouldn't feel good about funding. They're all good projects. And so one of the messages I'm trying to convince folks of is, like, whether you're on the top of the list or you're on the bottom of the list, it's worth doing these site tours across the state to build that support. Because if you're at the top of the list, it's going to be important. You don't need to do it in order to get the funding. You're going to get the funding unless something goes completely haywire with the state budget. But there's 18 other projects below you that are worthy of funding. And if the people on the bottom of the list get out there and say, hey, you know, this is still a good project and this is something that they can lay the groundwork for future funding support, my goal is to get, you know, for each of the last 2 bienniums, Ecology has asked for 70 million. We've gotten 50 million. Ecology is going to ask for 70 million again. That's the executive leadership beyond the Floodplains by Design program. That's their decision. But it's ultimately the legislators' decision. So if we can coordinate efforts across the state and get everybody, as many of FBD local partners out as possible to get those site tours, build that awareness, build that support, I feel really confident that we can get to 70 million this year. And if we can get to 70 million, then, you know, there's 90 million worth of ask, and that's going to just continue to grow over time. There's always going to be more requested funding than there is available. but the impact of this work is such where I think it's really worth the effort. So I've compiled all the contact information for legislative assistance, for the legislators themselves, and so I'm here to support all of you in those efforts. So just let me know. I'm not here to impose upon you. If you don't want to, if you have your own fact sheets, use them. Like I'm not going to remember the Pierce Conservation District, you know, the Washington Association of CDs had their template for legislative outreach, and I never used it and always rubbed the executive director the wrong way, but it's like ours is better. So I take that lesson with me now that I'm in a different seat. Like, you know, I'm here to support you. I'm not here to tell you how to do things. And then we also, Cass is the director of BEF's Watersheds program. So she's been working in watershed scale stakeholder engaged projects like this in Oregon for a long time. She's relatively new to Washington in the last year since she started this transition, but she is really leading this deep dive into the federal permitting issues. And since October, she's led 3 deep webinars with FEMA and Army Corps and everybody else to really get into these LOMAR, CLOMAR issues and started thinking about ways to streamline that process. And we just recently had a design charrette, value charrette with FEMA and a lot of other partners. That was really just a great positive outcomes that set some good steps forward for next steps. So there will be some additional follow-up there over the next few months, and probably a follow-up meeting, and looking at things like, you know, could the state fund liaison positions that work with Army Corps directly to just get 90% of the paperwork done, so that, you know, the Army Corps staff who approve permitting just have to do a very little amount of work, and it can streamline the process. Similar to like how I'm blanking on her name now, but the NRCS, the ASAP liaison position that we funded through the commission, you know, where it doesn't have to be the staff at these big federal agencies doing, you know, stacks and stacks of paperwork. There's ways for us as local partners to fund positions that can streamline that, and then they just have to put the stamp on it. So really just, you know, keeping our ear to the ground through the interactions of the Culture and Capacity Action Group, through the Flood Funding and Policy Action Group, to hear from all of you, like, what are the challenges you're running into? And then us, and you all are at capacity, you're trying to implement